Two key members of the Cleveland bullpen have been indicted, including a former Cy Young candidate. What does this mean for baseball?
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. And this is now the number one sports podcast network. That's right. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever they're calling it these days. And on Instagram, I am your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. But the best way to get a hold of us is right here on the YouTube page for those of you watching us. And make sure to leave that hashtag Everyday Sully because it helps us find your comments, so we can talk to you, have a little interaction here. Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. And before we get on the topic for today, let's go through and see what the trivia question was. And it was, what spot in the order was Shohei Ohtani hitting when he crushed his first big league home run on April 3rd, 2018? And Big John 08865 got it correct. He was batting eighth. He was batting eighth for I believe they were the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim in 2018. I could be wrong. They could have been the Los Angeles Angels. I know they weren't the Anaheim Angels. They should still be the California Angels. That's the best name for them. Can we be? It's the least confusing. But what are you going to do? But we remember we weren't sure about Ohtani. There was a big question mark. And of course, whenever anyone signs to a big, huge honking contract like that, there's never people going to say they're paying all this money for someone who's never played in the major leagues. Yes, they all become Thurston Howell III. I always, people who disagree with me for reasons, and I think they're not making the smartest argument. They get the rule. Well, I guess they don't like the DH. Me no like home runs. Okay, they get the Neanderthal voice, and the ones who don't think that players from outside the United States will make it, they become Thurston Howell. It all works out well in the end. So there you go. Yeah, he was batting eighth. Needless to say, he is done batting eighth. He's absolutely done batting eighth. So there you have it. And so the World Series is over. They haven't handed out all the hardware yet, and the fun hot stove leak has not kicked in. But a really unpleasant piece of news has come through the wire here. This is according to a report from ESPN's Jeff Passan and also Tim Stebbins from MLB.com. Those are the two places I'm going to be pulling most of my information from. We don't have a whole hell of a lot of information, but here's what we do know. We do know that Luis Ortiz and Emmanuel Clase are two pitchers for the Cleveland Guardians. And they were both suspended during the or they were put around. It was in July. They were. I guess it wasn't a suspension. It was a non-disciplinary paid leave during a probe on sports gambling. And Ortiz got that in Luis Ortiz got that in July, and a little bit later, Clase was placed on non-disciplinary paid leave, and that was through it was put on for basically the rest of the year. And Ortiz is a member of the Cleveland Guardians bullpen, and this year he wound up. He started a lot this year. He made 16 starts to an 88 2/3 innings pitch. Of course, Emmanuel Clase was their closer, and he had an unbelievable season in 2024. Was not as good in this year. Was actually had his was ineffective for a big chunk of the year. Now, here's the funny thing. You remove those two Jenga pieces from the team in late July. They had a winning record in the month of July, but you remember they went on the unbelievable run. And right around the time that the suspensions kicked in, or the paid, let's just call it the paid leave went in. It was right around the 4th of July. And the Cleveland Guardians wound up after that point going 48-26. There were 22 games above 500 after these two went on their non-disciplinary paid suspension. Well, now they have been indicted. We've got to the point where all the euphemisms have gone away, and prosecutors in New York are indicting them on charges, and this is according to MLB.com. I'm going to just quote it. On charges related to an alleged scheme to rig bets on pitches thrown in Major League Baseball games. Now, I made a terrible mistake. We brought up Shohei Ohtani earlier. I made a terrible mistake on this podcast of pontificating what I thought happened regarding Shohei Ohtani and his interpreter. I interpreted what had happened. Excuse the pun. I interpreted what happened was that Ape was his Shohei Ohtani's buddy who ran up a bunch of big gambling debts. Ohtani said, schmuck, paid him off, and then realized, oh, darn it, that's not the right thing to do. That's what I thought was happening. That was the only thing that made sense to me. And I said on the podcast, I think that's what happened. And it turns out that's not what happened. It turns out Ape was basically the talented Mr. Ripley, and was getting into all of Shohei's accounts and everything, doing all this stuff without him knowing it. I thought he was Fredo. He was actually the talented Mr. Ripley. And so I'm not making that mistake again. I'm not making the mistake of saying, here's what happened, or here's what I think happened, is how I phrased it. And I turned out to be wrong. I'm just saying what we know. Two pitchers are charged to a scheme to rig bets on pitches thrown. Once they were basically off the team for good, they played the best baseball in all the American League. Those are two things that are not up for debate. They have been indicted. They did go on that unbelievable run where they leapfrogged the Detroit Tigers on the final weekend of the season. What does this mean? And why is this important? Why it's important is, well, we can't have the elements of gambling make us question what's happening on the field. And the fact that I can bring up a couple of points regarding 2024 and Emmanuel Clase, as well as bringing up, we just had a big conversation about PED users in the Hall of Fame. The Pete Rose from the dead is going to raise its ugly head. And a couple of things that are mentioned in this book by Bruce Cooklick, called if I mispronounce the name, I'm sorry, to Everything a Season. And guess what? I'm going to bring up not just the 1919 World Series, but the 1914 and the 1912 World Series, and possibly the 1918 World Series. That these are all connected. And we can't have baseball be strong if we think that the motivations are tied to gambling, and that gambling will make us question the very games we watch. And we have to do everything we can to prevent that for the good of the game. But first, a word from FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better way to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or you want to ride a hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score to next fourth quarter comebacks. And in baseball, you can break it down for betting on pitch to pitch. Plus, you can even combine your live bets to a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to fanduel.com, sign up, and play your game with FanDuel. It's the official sports betting partner of the NBA. You know, when the Pete Rose debate was going on for it seems like ever, and it's still going on, the man's body is now dust, and we're still talking about it. I came to the conclusion that we asked the wrong question. People say, does Pete Rose belong in the Hall of Fame? And I said after some thought, I don't think he wanted to be. He wanted to be able to cash in on his martyrdom. The minute he got in the Hall of Fame, he was no longer in the news. The more he was left out of the Hall of Fame, the more he was in the news, the more he was able to cash in on that. And so I felt that the question was incorrect. Obviously, what he did on the field as a player, he should have been on the first ballot. But he was the manager of the Reds and betting on baseball. And I always had to explain this over and over again because people say, what would it matter if he bet on them to win? Well, baseball is played every day. So if you bet on your team to win on a Saturday, that affects how you manage on a Friday and it affects how you manage on a Sunday. If you save a pitcher or you use a pitcher differently or whatnot, because you're trying to push all the chips to the center of the table on a Saturday, it's going to affect how you play the game before and after. Just look at this year's Game 7 of the World Series. They pushed all their chips to the center of the table because they needed to win the game, both Toronto and Los Angeles. Would they use Trey Yesevich out of the bullpen the way they did? Would they use Blake Snell out of the bullpen the way they did? Would they pull Yamamoto on, no days rest the way that they did if it wasn't a special occasion to win all? Well, if you're trying to win on a certain day, you're going to manage differently. Dave Roberts won't manage the game. He wouldn't bring in Yamamoto on no days rest and have him pitch in extra innings, or Blake Snell, or Yesevich wouldn't pitch the way he did. But you manage differently if the goal is not winning over a 162 game season, but a one specific game. That's why even betting on your team to win, you just don't bring betting into it. Don't bring betting into it at all. That's why it was that way. So now we're seeing someone like Clase, who was the best reliever in baseball in 2024. He was a Cy Young contender. His numbers, no matter if you like traditional numbers like strikeouts per inning pitched, he struck out a ton of batters. His ERA was 0.61. He walked 9 batters unintentionally over 74 and a third innings. He was unhittable. Absolutely unhittable. And in the playoffs against the Detroit Tigers and the Yankees, he was a punching bag. And he allowed 3 home runs that year's postseason. His ERA in the division series was 6.35. His ERA in the ALCS against the Yankees was 15.43. He allowed 4 earned runs in 2 and a third innings. He allowed 8 earned runs in the postseason. Do you know how many earned runs he allowed all season in 2024? 5. 5 earned runs over the regular season, 8 earned runs in the postseason. Do I think he was betting and tipping pitches or doing whatever he needed to do? No, I think he got clobbered. However, when we find out he's indicted on betting over certain pitches, and if you're betting that he's going to pitch well and then he gets clobbered, that would be very good for people betting against him. And we find out that he's indicted in a betting situation regarding pitches, you can't help but look at how horrible he played in the 2024 postseason and think, gee whiz, less than a year later, he's on some sort of suspended pay with leave or what, and then indictments come in. I think Detroit and the Yankees caught up with him. But the fact that you even have to tilt your head a little bit like the RCA dog is why we don't have players involved with betting. Because even for a moment, you can look at that and go, wait a minute. He let up 5 earned runs during the regular season and 8 in the postseason in a high-profile situation, and he's indicted for making bets regarding pitches. Again, I didn't state anything there but facts. I didn't put that in a waffle iron and tell you the scenario of what I think happened. You like the little pantomime I did of making a waffle? For those of you just listening, I just did some phenomenal pantomiming of making a waffle. But these are two facts. Here's 3 facts. He barely let up a run during the entire regular season. He was the best reliever in baseball, was serious content. He was a Cy Young finalist, which is almost impossible now as a reliever. He let up nearly twice as many runs in the postseason as he did in the regular season. And he's indicted in a betting scheme involving pitches. Those are 3 facts. And the fact that we can even look at those and go, oh boy, I hope I don't put this puzzle together, is why this is serious. It's about what's on the field. And we know, hell, you've seen Field of Dreams. You know that the Shoeless Joe and the rest of the Chicago White Sox in 1919 took money to lose that World Series to the Cincinnati Reds. One of the best baseball movies of all time is 8 Men Out, which is about the events around it. Now, the book that's based on by the great Elliot Asanoff is somewhat controversial because there are some parts of it that were fictionalized and some parts of it are from dubious sources. But what we do know is that gamblers did come in, paid off the members of the White Sox who were favored to win that World Series. They took the money, and the White Sox lost the World Series, and the players were suspended, and their testimonies were stolen. So whether or not you're believing what Elliot Asanoff wrote, when some people don't believe in Asanoff, or if you believe that they really became ghosts and ended up in a cornfield in Iowa, those are the parts that are beyond reproach. And then when you look back at the 1919 World Series, you can pull the old RCA dog and go, huh. But the thing is if you think that that was an isolated incident, you would be what is called in the industry incorrect. Word was floating around about the 1918 World Series that the Cubs took a dive while playing the Red Sox. Could have been rumors. But then you have, as was written here in To Everything a Season, the 1914 World Series. The A's, run by Connie Mack, were unbelievable, gigantic favorites to beat the Boston Braves, who were in last place in the middle of August, who went on a rampage and won the pennant. But the Braves were considered to be a mosquito to the charging elephant that were the Philadelphia A's. And the Braves swept the A's. Didn't just beat them, they swept them in 4. And it was one of the greatest upsets of all time. And if your money was on the Braves, you cleaned up. Mentioned in here, the aftermath of that World Series was an enraged Connie Mack wound up basically breaking up the team to get his players off the club, as the whispers were going on that a lot of the players were sick of the American League and wanted to jump ship to the brand new Federal League, and they lay down and took a dive. Do we know that's the truth? Was it just whispers of the time? Well, betting was so prominent then that, especially knowing what happened in 1919, it's not out of the question. There is one thing that was an interesting note, not just in the Asanoff book, but other breaking down of the White Sox throwing the World Series in 1919, was that the signal to the gamblers was the pitcher hitting the first batter. Boom. It's on. The fix is on. In 1912, the Red Sox and the Giants played a star-studded World Series. It was the first ever Boston-New York World Series. And one of the games got suspended. So it was four at this point. It was 3-2 in favor of the Red Sox, and there was one tie. So Game 7 would have been a chance to have the Red Sox win the World Series 4-2 with one tie. And they had going on the mound Smokey Joe Wood. And Smokey Joe Wood was their ace pitcher, their answer to the great Christy Mathewson. And Smokey Joe Wood was the starting pitcher of Game 7 to clinch the World Series 4-2 for the Red Sox, 4-2, one tie. And it was a foregone conclusion that Smokey Joe Wood was going to win that game. The Giants clobbered him. He was knocked out in the first inning. Smokey Joe Wood hit the first batter. Does that mean Smokey Joe Wood threw the game? No. He was heavily favored. I'm sure all the smart money was on him. A signal in later World Series games that the fix was in was hitting the first batter. He hit the first batter, was rocked in the first, and pulled a Yamamoto and came out in the final game, the 8th game, to win the World Series in relief against the great Christy Mathewson. And the fact that we can look at those events and even start to put together a puzzle or see where the pieces lead, it's not definitive proof, but it makes you like, ooh, was that played on the level? Was that played on the level? Pete Rose managing the Reds, where he had unbelievably talented teams, really solid players on those clubs, and losing the division in 86, 87, and 88 to upstart teams where there was not the deepest talent, like the 86 Astros, like the 87 Giants, like the 88 Dodgers. And then we're finding out that he's betting on baseball as the manager. And the first year, he's suspended in 1989. They get Lou Piniella to manage in 1990. They go wire to wire and win the World Series. Again, I'm just stating facts at this point. How does that make us look at the 86, especially the 87? The Reds were much better than the San Francisco Giants that year and were in the lead for most of the year before they fell apart. And they were probably better than the 88 Dodgers, who, yes, had Hershiser and Gibson, but not a whole hell of a lot after that. And they had a great year from Danny Jackson that year. They had their own ace and a solid bullpen led by John Franco and the great Eric Davis and Chris Sabo and a lot of terrific talent on the team. And Hall of Famer Barry Larkin was starting to come onto his own. And we look at those 3 years, especially, and go, what's going on there? And that's why we can't have it. Because baseball has to have that quality of the greatest event of a sporting event where nobody knows the outcome. We saw the great joy of what happened in the World Series we just witnessed between Los Angeles and Toronto. And we can't have people looking askance and saying, is this on the level? Let me tell you something. The NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a pain in the tuchus. Between the long lines, the login screens, the prices jumping at checkout, it's frustrating. That's why I use GameTime. It's the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. GameTime is fast, easy, and backed by the GameTime guarantee. You always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. Now, I use GameTime to get my tickets to go see the National League Championship Series at Dodger Stadium. And I pulled up GameTime, just a couple of tabs, boom, 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 and I got great deals. And now NFL fans you can see your favorite NFL teams for as low as 100 tomatoes. Now, the app made it super simple. You can see exactly when I got my NLCS tickets, I could see the exact view from where I was at Dodger Stadium. But I used the zone deal. So I picked the section, GameTime picked the seats, and you save big. I got to be honest with you, it's faster, it's cheaper, and it's less stressful than any other way I've ever bought tickets. So download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket. Download Game Time. When? Do it today. I don't mean to be preachy today, but this is not a small story. And you may not agree with everything I'm saying, but I haven't said anything that wasn't wrong. And I looking at that 2024 ALCS, do I think Clase threw it? No, I don't. But I don't know. And there are pieces to a puzzle that make it sound like I'm not talking about being a moon landing denier. When you're a moon landing denier or a flat earther, you can say, okay, you've got your work cut out for you to prove what you're saying. But if you're saying a guy may have been doing something with his pitches when he pitches completely differently in the postseason than he did in the regular season, and less than a year later, he is being investigated, and then those turn into indictments. Now, of course, you could indict a ham sandwich, as was very famously said, and he's not guilty of anything. But this is the scenario. And I got into some people called me all sorts of names on here when I said that I found what Pete Rose did to be worse than PED users. And I stand by that. You may not agree with me, and that's fine. We can disagree. That's my opinion. But it came up when I talked about the episode the other day, which was about, letting in the Bonzes and the Clemens and the McGuires and the Sosas to the Hall of Fame. I think we're being ridiculously hypocritical, as there are people in there who we know have used PEDs, not suspected. We've had people who have had positive tests in there. We have people involved with the Balco scandal who have been in there. So we're being selective in our outrage. And Tays 27, one of the listeners says, might as well let all the cheaters in. Here's why I think what Rose did and what the 1919 White Sox did was worse than what, say, Bonds or Clemens or Palmeiro or Giambi or McGuire or Sosa or the 2017 Astros or the 2018 Red Sox did. And that's this. They were all trying to win. They're all trying to find an edge to be better. Gaylord Perry's in the Hall of Fame. We know he cheated. He didn't break the law. The steroid abuse was breaking the law. Using a spitball is not against the law. I could hold a baseball. I could stand out on Colorado Avenue in Pasadena and lick a baseball all day and drool all over it. I'd be gross, but I wouldn't be breaking the law. I think that's kind of a line you draw there. Banging a trash can is not against the law. Should be. But they're all trying to win. When you bring gambling into it, you're bringing in a motivation to do something other than winning. If you're betting to win that game, then what you're saying about the games you don't bet on is you're not trying to win on those days, or at least not putting in the same effort. I would rather have a PED user than someone who is betting on baseball. That's my opinion. If you disagree with me, that's your opinion. Neither one of us are wrong. Those are our opinions. But unfortunately, some of the facts regarding Clase and Ortiz are not favorable right now. And obviously, a weight was lifted from Cleveland after this happened, after they were taken off the roster, which seems counterintuitive to remove a player who the previous year was a finalist for the Cy Young Award. But here we are. And by the way, I just want to say to you all, most importantly, thank you. Thank you so much for making Locked On MLB your first listen. And most importantly, thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcasting network. And whatever your team is, check that team out. Make us your first listen, but go check out, are you a Dodger fan? Are you a Yankee fan, a Red Sox fan, a Marlin fan, a Rays fan, a Cleveland Guardian fan? Wherever fan base you are, we've got a Locked On show for you. And if you're an NHL, NBA, NFL, you like college football, we got a show for you there too. We've got you covered here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Let's bring in the trivia question, shall we? What pitcher who was not in on the fix threw a pair of complete game victories for the White Sox in the 1919 World Series? One pitcher who was not going to be paid by the gamblers did his job and threw 2 complete game victories for the White Sox in that World Series. Put your answers right down below. Talking about Clase and Ortiz's indictment. It's not a conviction. They're not guilty of anything, but something doesn't smell right now, and I don't want that smell stinking up my game. This has been Locked On MLB. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.